Hello, and welcome to another edition of On the Road with Legal Talk Network. This is Farrah Fite, and I'm the host of this episode, which is being recorded from the 2020 National Conference of Bar Presidents mid-year meeting. Joining me now, I have two great guests. The first is Dede Moses, and the second, Judge Michael Burton. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right. Before we get started, we'd love to learn a little bit about each of you. Could you tell us where you work and what you do? Let's start with Dede.
I am an assistant U.S. attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Connecticut. I handle primarily civil rights cases, but I also handle affirmative fraud cases. And I've been with the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is part of the Department of Justice, for over 10 years. I also am the immediate past president of the Connecticut Bar Association and a former president of the Crawford Black Bar Association.
Fantastic. And Dede, you're also of counsel for the National Conference of Bar Presidents and helped coordinate the program that we're going to be talking about today, correct?
That is correct. I had a great time working with you, Farrah.
All right. And Judge Burton, presiding judge of St. Louis County, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how I roped you into being part of the mid-year meeting?
Well, I'm still wondering about that, but my name is Mike Burton. I have been a judge here in St. Louis County for 22 years. St. Louis County is the largest county in the state of Missouri. We have about 1 million people in our county. Prior to my joining the bench, I was a criminal defense attorney, primarily addressing death penalty cases. I also did a lot of work for the family court as a guardian ad litem.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you both for joining us today. We're here to discuss impossible innovations out of crisis. That was the theme for our opening plenary of the mid-year meeting for the National Conference of Bar Presidents. And Judge Burton was willing to share with the entire group of bar leaders from across the United States and even other countries efforts that they've undertook during the pandemic to address access to justice in St. Louis County. So thanks for sharing your experiences, and hopefully we can all learn from the way that you designed your ideas and how we could implement those in our own jurisdictions. So let's begin with Judge Burton. Can you tell us a little bit about St. Louis County? It's unique for many reasons, and I'm sure our listeners would like to understand that better.
Certainly. St. Louis County is the sixth wealthiest county in our state, but there are portions of our county, specifically in West County, that are incredibly affluent. The portion of St. Louis County that really has significant challenges is that portion that is north of Highway 70. That Highway 70 basically cuts the county into two, going east-west. And North County specifically has, well over 40 different municipalities, many of which are facing significant poverty challenges. One of the biggest problems that we've been dealing with is trying to address the fact that just to get to Clayton, which is where our county seat is extremely difficult, in particular because of limited public transportation. And because we are in an affluent city itself, parking is expensive, and just finding parking can be a real challenge as well.
And so really the innovative ideas that St. Louis County undertook, maybe in which were sped up because of the pandemic, really go to access to justice and the fact of literally the ability of citizens of St. Louis County being able to make it to court and do so in a way that it was not incredibly disruptive or overly burdensome or expensive to them?
No question. It's been a challenge that we've had way before the pandemic, of course. And a very large percent, I think we want to say 85% of the tenants in landlord-tenant matters came from North County, and a very high percentage of petitioners seeking orders of protection come from that area as well. And we always heard about the difficulties in just getting to court for purposes of getting a ex parte order of protection, and just in coming to court to respond to a eviction challenge is always been a real difficult situation for many of our residents.
Dede, I know that in your role as president of the Connecticut Bar Association, you were one of the first bars to adapt to virtual meetings and virtual activities. And with St. Louis County going that direction, do you want to dive into some of the ins and outs of what that looks like?
Yeah, so we actually made a concerted effort at the beginning of my bar year to plan meetings that would be virtually. The pandemic had not come up, or there was no issues regarding, transmission of any virus of any type. But what we recognized was that lawyers in different parts of the state, lawyers who were younger, lawyers who had disabilities, couldn't get to meetings, and they couldn't be part of the larger bar. And so what we realized is that we needed to make some changes to how we operated in order to be more inclusive as a bar association. And so we started to talk about different ways. Connecticut's not a big state, but during rush hour time periods, it can feel like you're driving across the state of Texas. And so what we did was we started to plan virtual events, and some people definitely were not excited. Some people thought I was kind of crazy and were wondering how we were going to pull it off. But I think that when the pandemic hit, a lot of people recognized that we were in a better spot than we would have been in, because we had already been thinking through this. My year as president-elect, we tested some of the technology. We had a couple of Zoom meetings. We kind of tried some of the different ways it would work and ways it wouldn't work. And so we had some functional knowledge of what was possible. And so when we had to go virtual and the pandemic first hit in early March, our staff at the CBA, they're phenomenal, they were ready to go, and they were able to switch to a virtual platform very, very quickly. Because even prior to my year as president, they had been urging the CBA to utilize the virtual technology that we had at our fingertips. And so I think that we're still in the testing phase. We've tried out Zoom, we're trying out Microsoft Teams, and I think one of the things that Judge Burton mentioned and other people have mentioned before is, the importance of being flexible in the space and trying things out and being open to making adjustments and changes to what you've been doing in the past if you recognize that it can be beneficial.
One of the aspects of the plenary program that you're both involved in producing and speaking at was looking at design thinking and critical design thinking and how to follow those steps to implement innovations in the legal sector. And the first step is identifying the users and making sure that they're your focus. So Dede, it looks like you guys identified your members as the users and looking at their needs. Judge Burton, the same with St. Louis County, but identifying the actual users, the parties who are involved in cases as your clients are the consumers of the legal system, and focusing that. And then the next step of that is to build a prototype and test it. So Dede, you just explained how you guys were testing out with Zoom. Judge Burton, can you tell us about the first test that you guys did, or how you first implemented virtual proceedings in St. Louis County?
Well, the process itself was fairly simple to get started. We knew that right away that Zoom And then ultimately for us, WebEx was the way to go. And that seemed to work fairly well. We really thought, and we were patting ourselves on the back thinking, this opportunity is reaching more people than we thought. We really had some challenges for very long periods of time in the family court in particular, and in probate court. Many times the parties would not live close by, live out of state. And we started seeing that we were able to reach people that hadn't been part of the meetings before, specifically in the family court, where we were looking at finding adequate kinship placements for children that had been abused and neglected. We were reaching folks in a way that we hadn't before. And we really thought things were working well. And then we started getting a lot of meetings that involved phone calls, and really sat and took a step back and said, this is not due process. This is completely inappropriate. So we knew that we had to come up with plan B. And, that just was not something that was going to completely replace what we were doing, because the process was working. It just wasn't reaching as many people as we had hoped. And then we took some additional steps.
What was it like for each of you? And let's begin with Judge Burton and then go back to Dede, to take your mindset of, you, Judge Burton, as a judge, and Dede, you as a bar leader who's highly engaged in your bar associations, and switch that mindset to the users that you're trying to build a better system for. So how do you change your point of view to try to think on behalf of users of the justice system, Judge Burton and Dede, your bar members, or even potential bar members?
Well, it was very easy to step into the shoes of people that were trying to have access to our hearings. Just participating in a Zoom docket call made it very apparent that there were a lot of people that were not able to participate in the process in ways that they'd been able to before the pandemic. Clearly, people would come into the proceeding, if they were even able to do that, and just had absolutely no idea what was going on, in part because they couldn't see anybody. And then you add that to the fact that there were all these challenges with bandwidth and the like, where people would be calling in 10, 15 different times during a docket because they either weren't hearing anything or just got disconnected constantly.
Dede, what were some of the ways that you tried to take on the mindset of your potential users and shifting to a virtual environment for your bar members?
So pre-pandemic, we tried to start very slow because you didn't have not everyone appreciated what it was like. As Judge Burton said, it was very easy for me to step in the shoes of a young attorney or, someone who lived across the state, because I travel across the state for my job. I've sat in traffic for hours and hours and gotten to a meeting disheveled and, stayed there for a half an hour and got to do it all again. So I experienced that a lot. And I have a young son who is 5. And so just trying to balance, his life with my life, it was easy for me to empathize. What I recognized is that there were parts we were missing. So there were parts that I could see, but I recognized there was parts we couldn't see. And the other part we couldn't see were for the older members of our bar who probably would feel a little bit put out by some of the technology that they probably weren't familiar with, hadn't really thought about downloading. And so we decided to start very slow because we didn't want to include some people and exclude others. But then the pandemic hit. And I think the need to go virtual overshadowed all of the issues that people were having. And the opportunity to jump head in and just go for it presented itself. And thank God we had, such a great staff at the Connecticut Bar Association and such great members who really just stepped up. Our committee members, our section members, the leaders of the CBA just stepped up with really, really amazing, creative virtual programs and events to keep the bar going. And, that all hands on deck approach, I think, is really what made it truly amazing to watch and experience. But it was ushered in by the pandemic. So in some ways, I think we needed this. We needed this experience to kind of drag us kicking and screaming into the current century, because I don't think we would have gotten here this quickly without the pandemic.
So one of the things that like a light bulb just went on, or it was that aha moment for me and sitting through the plenary when we were learning about critical design thinking, was that it shouldn't be done in a vacuum. And I'd love for each of you to talk about how you were testing your process, but then you recognized it was time to have more of an interdisciplinary approach to the way that you examined what was working and what wasn't. Dede, could you talk to us about collaboration? You mentioned some of your committee and section chairs and the staff being on board. Were there others that you collaborated with, or even, reaching out to other states to see what was working for them and maybe what wasn't?
Yeah, so I am from a big family, so I believe in the power of collaboration and leaning on people. I live by those values. And so we leaned on every single person we could touch and find. Our staff obviously were at the forefront of it, but we leaned on our section leaders. We had Friday meetings with them just so we could be on the same page. We leaned on the local bars, the affinity bars. We held programs with them. They were part of our COVID-19 task force. So we were bouncing ideas off of them, getting feedback from them. We leaned on the state and federal courts. We had great working relationships with them. We were helping them with CLEs and programs so people can get educated very quickly on the virtual platforms they were using. We helped the state court with obtaining feedback from the bar as they were rolling out their virtual programs and platforms. And we talked extensively with the young lawyers and more experienced members of the bar about their experiences and making sure that they have the technology and the resources available to them to really be able to take advantage of a lot of the very quick changes that were happening. And I think that, we'll see. Time will tell how this all plays out. But so far, I think it's been successful.
Judge Burton, I know that you've shared that in some of those interdisciplinary meetings that the court started having, you walked in thinking that the court had the answers and came out sometimes thinking that it was, your mind was changed based on the conversations that had taken place. Can you talk about what the benefit of having those meetings with those other agencies throughout the county and communities?
Well, you were very diplomatic about the way you put that, Farrah. I would say that when we had these meetings, so we could all point our fingers at all the different people at the table being the main problem, we walked out of these meetings realizing we were a big part of the problem. And the great thing about where we went, and this is still an ongoing situation, we've had one location that we're using. We're now moving on to looking at other possibilities as well. There are still so many more things that we can do to make sure that people have access. But we had identified the spot. It seemed to be pretty clear that there was this location that would make sense in all regards. It just was trying to get the folks that, were from our county that, had this empty building to get us to, give us the permission to use it. So I have a great mentor in an old professor of mine, I should say a very youngish professor, but who's been there a while. And she indicated that we really need to get to the grassroots here, get the various folks from the communities to engage not only with us, but with folks from the county that could really lay it on about just how problematic it is for people to not be able to participate in these order of protection hearings and these landlord-tenant eviction matters. And those were voices that were heard so much more loudly and clearly than anything that we were trying to get across. And at some point, all of a sudden, all the ducks were lined in a row, and it seemed to just fall into place. That we just had great people all the way around, but I think to get these folks from the county to agree that there was a problem ultimately occurred. And once they realized how big of a deal it was, they were as cooperative and as supportive as anyone. And we have this really exciting opportunity now that just finally opened on Monday, a couple days ago, and we're now working on getting and generating some good PR, because that's going to take a little while before we really start getting some business. But we're excited.
So Judge Burton, can you tell us a little bit more about, phase 2 of virtual proceedings for users of the court in St. Louis County? I know initially you guys offered, I think it was coined the Zoom garden in the lobby of the courthouse, where those without access to internet or technology could come to the lobby, socially distanced, walk up to a kiosk and participate. But now phase 2, you're like literally taking that idea, but spreading it throughout the county. Is that right?
Yes, except we were actually in phase 0. And while we were in phase 0, we couldn't even let anyone in the building. Now that we got back into phase 1, we were able to resume our Zoom garden. And I'm not allowed to say that and use that term anymore. We're calling it our e-court area, where people can come into our courthouse in Clayton and get set up with different kiosks and then get hooked into these proceedings. Now we're expanding to this new location that is in North County that has an incredible area of free parking that is accessible by all of the bus lines with ease. And now our hope is that folks are going to use that in a way that will show everyone that we also need to continue to expand. Because even though this is in North County, we need more locations. And I'm not saying that after day 3, we're ready to move on, but we also really believe that other options will even be necessary. And I'm already meeting with some groups now to start getting folks to see how important that is.
Congratulations on that opening too. Sorry, Dede, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, have you been able to survey the attorneys? One of the things that we noticed in Connecticut, especially with the changes the branch has made in the state and federal system, some attorneys are more excited about the changes than others. Are you guys surveying attorneys? What are they saying? What are their experiences? Have you had any blunders like we've seen with the cat filter? Any lessons learned?
I am a blunder magnet. So yes, there are, many blunders. And I think I expressed this at our last meeting that on our first occasion, when we were just looking at this facility, we all just walked in and we all started looking and pointing, and all of a sudden all these people come forward from the county like, what in the hell are you doing here? And then when they heard about it, it put them on edge. They were not very interested in talking to us at all. So that process really was slowed down a bit before we were able to really engage and have people see what we were trying to do. I think people were afraid that we just came in and put our stakes up and said, okay, we're ready to roll. And that bull in the china shop approach, which is something I've mastered a bit, is not something that works at all.
So Judge Burton, I know historically judges used to travel the circuit. Do you think technology is now allowing you to travel the circuit in a modern way?
It's a great way of looking at it. There's folks here that think a few of us could really get a lot out of a justice bus, and they still think that they're afraid that I'm ready to get that started. But give it a couple of years and we'll see where the needs are. But what I love about whoever says this, what I love about the pandemic, I don't mean it in that way, but the silver lining that's there is huge, because this is giving us a chance to try things that I don't think we would have done before, or we wouldn't have had as much buy-in before. And my hope is that this new setting in Northwest Crossing in North County is going to be a huge success. I really feel very confident of that, which reminds me, I didn't respond to Dede's question about the attorneys getting the buy-in, and I apologize about that. As far as the buy-in goes, the attorneys that we're really dealing with are not as many, because right now, most of what we're dealing with are pro se folks and, getting, access. But the folks from legal services, the folks from the public defender's system, the folks from different domestic violence advocacy groups are very supportive. But many of the folks that we deal with in the private bar haven't really been exposed yet to a lot of what we're doing, and it probably won't need to, other than to be mindful of the fact that when they represent landlords, that they can tell the tenants that they see have some challenges about this facility in Northwest Crossing. And we hope that happens.
Dede, you said that you guys are now examining kind of additional ways and platforms of how to communicate. Could you share a little bit about that, and also share any advice for other bar leaders who are looking to expand on maybe what they just thought they were temporarily putting in place when the pandemic started, and how to make virtual, a positive engagement that's lasting for their bar associations?
Right. So I think that, we started pre-pandemic a state of the legal profession task force that was looking at the changes the bar needs to make in order to become relevant and address the massive access to justice gaps that we've been seeing. One of the things that the task force recommended doing, and the membership committee had been thinking about doing, was surveying our members, but also surveying the public and finding out from the public, are we doing our job as attorneys, right? The courts are one thing, but are attorneys doing their jobs? Are we doing their jobs in getting them the information they need? Are we being effective in our advocacy? Is there anything they'd like from the bar for us to do in order to make them feel like attorneys are actually here to work for them? I mean, when I graduated from law school, I wanted to save the world. So the question is, are we actually doing that? Are we making the world a better place for the public, or are we missing massive groups? And so one of the things that we're working on doing right now is we've collected data from our members, and now we're talking about focus groups and other outreach that we can do to collect real statements, real concerns, real comments from the community, not on just what's happening in the courts, but also what's happening in the bar at large and how lawyers are actually serving them. And I recommend, honestly, if I could do it again to other bars, to do that first. I think that if we had done that first, it would have saved us a lot of time. It probably would have redirected where we went in terms of what we did first and what we did second. And it probably would have given us some leverage to really push a lot of these technologies a lot earlier on. I think also one of the things we learned is that there is something called Zoom fatigue. It's like a real thing. You don't want to be virtual all the time, and having a 100% virtual platform is probably not the solution. The theme for my bar year was balance for a better legal profession. And I think we do have to find that balance. There's certain things that are just better in person, and there are things that are better remote. And so I think one of the things that we have to do is play with that and try to figure out where that balance lies. When you're trying to weigh with things on a scale, you're constantly moving items back and forth, taking items up, putting items down. I think that's what we have to do. We have to give ourselves the space to play with some of these scales and figure out what works for each bar. And it's going to be different. What works in one part of the country may not work in another. And so we just have to reach out to each other like we've been doing through NCDP. NCDP is the great resource for all bars to kind of see what other bars are doing, kind of look at their resources, try different things out, see what works, see what doesn't, and share with other bars what did work, so people can benefit from that, that think tank that NCDP is.
Thank you, Dede. Great suggestions there. Judge Burton, any advice to other jurists who are, finding that they are virtual, thought it was going to be temporary, and now a year later, still in the same pickle, or for members of the bar and bar leaders who may be listening to this about how they can coordinate or be collaborative with the courts and finding solutions to access to justice during this time and, fortunately, well into the future?
Well, I would say that for me, the advantage of having a whole group of young, progressive, forward-thinking judges, and I wish I could include myself in that category, but I can't. But just having, a great group of people that are so well-versed on the technology and really are thinking in ways I could never even imagine. I just know that I had a very simple idea with a few groups of judges about where our needs were about looking at other buildings, but the need for other people that are in your circle to provide you with, all these innovative ideas really makes a huge difference. And it's just making sure to listen. I remember quite well as a parent that had teenagers that was not my strong point. I was often reminded of that fact, and just working on listening to the great ideas that people have. It sounds so basic, but it's something that I think as judges we often don't do.
Great advice. Is there anything else that either of you would like to add before we wrap up this episode?
No, I'd like to thank you for putting this together. Thank you, Judge Burton, for being part of not only this podcast, but also the NCBB program. I think so many people benefited from hearing from you and learning, different ideas that they can bring back to their local organizations and their courts.
And thank you very much. I wish I could take all the credit about some of the very limited things we've done here, but it takes a village, and we've got a great village here in St. Louis County, and I'm so proud to be part of it. And thank you for including me for sure.
All right. Well, we've reached the end of the road for this episode. I want to thank our guests for joining us today. Thank you, Judge Burton and Dede Moses. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you like what you heard, please rate and leave us a review in your favorite podcasting app. We'll see you next time for another episode of On the Road with Legal Talk Network.
If you'd like more information about what you've heard today, please visit LegalTalkNetwork.com. Subscribe via iTunes and RSS. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, or download our free Legal Talk Network app in Google Play and iTunes. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.